Greetings. When people talk about moving away from fossil fuels, there's often the conversation of carbon capture and storage. And I think the capture part's good, but storing it deep underground, that's just a waste of materials. Imagine if you could just grow oil. And I'm not talking about corn or soybeans, I'm talking about a plant that most people never notice, and if they do, they're just kind of disgusted. Yeah. What am I talking about? This Freedom Phil, like, subscribe, I'll explain. Let's get into it. There's a technology where they can literally take algae, that stuff that grows in ponds, stuff that's green and kind of weird looking. You can literally grow that stuff and squeeze oil out of it. There's certain varieties of it that are highly productive for oil production. And you can, kind of customize your oil, whether you're on jet fuel or diesel or whatever, or imagine you were just making fuel to put back into a power plant. So what I'm getting at with that is that instead of doing this thing where we store the carbon deep underground, because it's just wasting materials. Basically take that same material, make a vertical tube style algae farm, and you could produce thousands of gallons, if not barrels. I can't even think of how many barrels, ridiculous amounts of oil on 1 acre of land. So you have the power plant right there. And then, some of the fuel it takes in, it could even be produced from the very same algae farm. So you capture the carbon, feed it to the algae farm, and then make the oil on site, and then feed the power plant, whether it's natural gas or oil or whatever, basically constantly recycling this until eventually you'd have to think at some point the carbon would actually run out. You'd run out of it. And that's what people say, what happens in that case? Well, we have all this land all over the country, that's farmable, but not really growing anything. Instead of growing corn and freaking soybeans, because yes, they have their uses, not knocking them, but why not grow stuff like giant macanthasis grass and other types of biofuels? Like the giant macanthasis grass that they're growing, they're trying to make one that's inert, like a mule, can't reproduce. And it'll grow for anywhere from 20 to 30 years. And it grows the height of a tractor trailer. You could grow this material, mow it, once or twice a year, turn it into fuel pellets, put that in the power plant, capture the carbon as it goes up the stack, and then feed it to these algae farms. So we'd be slowly moving the carbon out of the atmosphere via the farm. And then what would happen is that we could basically, use it as a fuel source. It would produce jobs as well. But ultimately, for all the great technology that we do have, there is one elephant in the room, major problem that we have. Most people are unwilling to make the conversion to a lower watt lifestyle. It's what I refer to as people are still stuck in the 1980s dream, where everything's on a turn dial, my vehicle is bigger than yours, and God forbid I commute in anything less than something that gets, oh man, I wish you got better gas mileage, but you buy horribly inefficient vehicles. Like if your pickup got 25 miles to the gallon, that would be incredible in the modern era. But the fact of it is most people are lucky if they get, 16 to 20, because they get something that's ridiculously oversized. The SUVs, the cars, all this. I mean, I'm not seeing maglev trains. I mean, people complain about the jet fuel and the pollution from airports, but yet do you see bullet trains all over America? 300 miles an hour is pretty goddamn fast, and I bet they can get them even faster. So when there's no real motivation for people to change that because they're comfortable, and most of them never lived in a low watts lifestyle. Like my van right there, I've got a 300-watt solar system on it. I got two little solar systems. I got one that's hooked up to a battery system on top of the clamshell, and the other two panels go to a Blue Eddy. I think I've put around $1,000 or so into it, and it's great. I'm in the middle of nowhere. I've got power to run my TV for all the over-the-airwave stuff, power up my gaming systems, the switches and the DS, and cell phones, all that. Got my radios. I'm doing fine. As far as refrigeration, that little chest freeze right there only uses 31 watts when it's running, and it only runs part of the day. Part of it is how good is your insulation. Chest freezer designs are just better. They're just better than this thing will ever be. I don't care how efficient they try to make this design, it will never be efficient because literally the coolant just falls out every time you open the door. So this idea that we're going to save the environment by getting rid of, say, fossil fuels, that's a nice pipe dream, but then you ask the question, what about, like electric vehicles? Well, okay, are you really comfortable? And most people are, by the way, with the concept that basically it's nearly slave labor going on in Africa so they can get the precious minerals they need to make these batteries. And then the other question of that is that if you're morally okay with that, because otherwise, are you willing to pay the absurd amount of money you would have to pay for an electric vehicle if the metals were produced in a stable, ethical Western country, whether it's America or Europe or some other place. You know, like free trade. You know, they talk about coffee, like free trade electric vehicle batteries. Are we going to see that? And the answer is fucking no, we're not. Not anytime soon. If you can recycle these batteries is another question. And one thing we should really be asking, how many times can we recycle the material in those batteries? And then if we can, great. But if we can't, are we just pissing away a potential precious natural resource just for a fashion trend? You know, I mean, you could also argue that because people are still living the 1980s dream, most of them are so horribly in debt because they choose to be. By the way, it's not like it's like the whole concept of the deal with the devil. You remember, you have to sign the deal. You have to negotiate. You got to call the guy up and say, hey, I want this. And that's the exact issue. Most people, when I tell people, they're like, I tell them, well, like as a trucker, I could show you just basically how you could be retired by the age of 25 to 30, somewhere in that range. They can't even fathom that. They can't. They're like, that's impossible. I mean, I got student loans, college, all this. My house is $500,000, all this crap. And I'm like, yeah, but mathematically, I can just show you how to do this. It just requires dedication to do what you're doing. And the reason I say this, it isn't that you make some money and move out of the country, but you don't buy in the fucking city or the suburbs where your house is now $500,000 to $1 million because it's just it's an hour instead of 2 hours away from your work. And this is another thing, working. When are we going to get away from this commuting crap? I mean, really, if you want to get down to that, you're basically robbing yourself. Whatever your rent is or your mortgage, take how much you get paid and then add up the hours you didn't get paid to drive there and back. And then the cost of fuel, the cost of maintenance. We have a whole lifestyle in this country, this world, that is pretty much predicated on always being comfortably broke. And because of that, the better environmental choices that you would have made will never happen. So coming back to the whole carbon capture, get rid of fossil fuels and all that, I don't know if America, to be honest, is even close to being potentially ready for something like this because mentality wise, everybody's still pretty much, it's like a continuation of high school and middle school, or people trying to keep up with the Joneses, people trying to be popular, people that are, frankly, I'm not saying ignorant, uneducated, but yeah, they kind of are. Like the things that would greatly affect them over the course of their life are basically, um, they kick that aside for trinkets. No different than they did in middle school or high school. Like, what shirt do you wear? What clothes do you wear? So that's where I think the environmental movement has become, in some respects, for all the great science that's out there, it's basically just a little bird out there right now. But it's nothing more than a fashion show. So I don't know. I'd love to see the technology get better. I'd love to see a world where, eventually we're slowly decarbonizing the world. And hopefully we can maybe get temperatures down a little bit to the point where places up in the north where the lakes of methane, like literally look it up. Canada, Alaska, Siberia, they have real issues with all these muskegs and these swamps thawing out. And we're talking multiple thousands of years, if not millions of years of ancient methane coming to the surface. And if you think carbon's a problem, methane is 60 to 100 times worse than carbon. So yeah, we do need to do something about it. But this idea of like just shoving the shit in the ground and not doing anything with it, it's kind of dumb. But that's my thoughts on it. It's Freedom Phil. Like, subscribe, take it easy.